Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is your watchful eye on the nation's capital. Every weeknight, covering current events, issues of faith, family, and freedom from a conservative Christian perspective.
Washington Watch, thanks so much for joining us.
Bringing you up close to newsmakers, members of Congress, and prominent pro-family leaders from across the nation.
That's just the tip of the iceberg of the threats and the dangers that children are facing online.
Tony is the president of the Family Research Council, a former state legislature, ordained minister, police officer, and veteran of the Marine Corps.
Terrorism experts are sounding the alarm.
And welcome to the Washington Watch News Desk.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is your leading source for what's really happening in our nation's capital.
Well, this is a state issue. The federal government shouldn't be forcing these states.
Don't miss Washington Watch with Tony Perkins. Weeknights at 6, only on the Dove TV. Encouraging and informative. Tackling the tough issues facing America and our nation's freedom. That's Secolo on the Dove TV.
DAs around the country finding who they want to prosecute and then determining what crime they could charge them with.
You can't believe this is the country we're living in, that this is happening.
A bold half hour hosted by ACLJ's Jordan and Logan Secolo, taking you inside the battle of constitutional and political freedom, discussing issues that matter to you and your family.
This is just not the right precedent we want to be setting, even if we don't like Donald Trump.
This is just all-out chaos, and that's what could happen very soon.
Watch Secolo for issues that matter to you, addressing the problems of Christian rights in the workplace, school, the marketplace, and protecting human life.
I hope this doesn't have to go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Be in the know with Secolo. Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday only on the Dove TV. In a world desperately seeking truth, Cliff Connectley and his son Stuart travel across the U.S. to give an answer for questions, doubts, and challenges concerning faith.
What is the evidence that Muhammad spoke the truth?
Okay, welcome back. Always a joy to have with us when we have time to sit down with our good friend Dan Perkins. He's a political commentator, the host of What's on My Mind podcast, widely recognized, and he writes romantic novels, a series called Sad Eyes. He has a couple of websites, danperkins.guru. He has a great outreach to veterans called Songs and Stories for Soldiers.us. You can go there, and of course you can check out the Sad Eyes romance novels online at through Barnes & Noble and, of course, Amazon as well. He wakes up thinking, he goes to bed thinking. I think he dreams thinking. He thinks.
That's true. That's true.
Hi, Dan. How you doing, buddy?
Good. I was watching the promos for some. Are these new shows that are coming on in the evening hour?
They're there. They're already on our programs, and yeah, we're part of our lineup. So good stuff.
That's
yeah.
good.
Good. Thank
really
you.
Good.
Thank you. All right. Well, a lot to talk about. Short amount of time as always. The president did not stick around G7 too long. He didn't like the resolution dealing with Iran, saying we want to monitor the nuclear program. He said, no, we want it eliminated. So he didn't sign that, and he got on Air Force One, and he came home early because of the rising tension in the Middle East. What did you think of all that?
I mean, we have spent numerous times talking, you and I, about trying to negotiate with Muslims and their commitment to the Quran and to Kiev, that when they're dealing with infidels, they can make all kinds of promises, but there's no penalty for not keeping your promise. Now, yesterday morning, we got an urgent message from the Iranian government. Please, we would like to start talks. And was sending a message that we interpreted, perhaps incorrectly, that they were really saying, "Uncle, you're going to destroy us." And yet, within 12 hours, they launched another barrage on Israel. So you can't trust what they're going to say, and that they'll do whatever they say they're going to do. So I think that this is going to be a difficult thing to do, and the question is, does Israel have enough bombs for their fighters and their bombers and their missile launchers to level Iran if have to, and would they? That's the big question. How Benjamin Netanyahu has just said it could take as much as a week to 2 weeks to finish our mission. It's a scary situation.
All right, so Israel's pretty much wiped out Iran's Air Force, not only there in Iran, but in Syria, so they have no air capacity. The president and the prime minister are warning the citizens of Tehran to get out of town, and there is a massive traffic jam doing just that. The prime minister has said within the last 12 hours, your day of freedom, your day of getting what you really want is near. We are continuing to supply them with what they need, except for what they really, really need at the moment, which is the bunker-busting bomb that only can be delivered by a B-52. And there's talks about Israel renting a B-52 to deliver the bomb to a uranium enrichment site deep into the hills of Iran. There's a lot going on here. Do you think ultimately, long goal, but maybe short term, that there's a regime change?
Well, I think that's what the Israeli government, and I interviewed a gentleman yesterday, Israeli, and they're all praying for regime change in Tehran. But there's one thing I really have to bring to your attention, and not that you didn't see it. You saw it and read it and didn't think about it. Only one time on any release over the last 5 days was there any discussion about American bombers attacking energy facilities inside of Iran. Once. We were told that there was significant damage to the largest natural gas port in the world, half owned with Qatar and half by Iran. We heard a possibility of a refinery being attacked. But as long as we leave that infrastructure intact, the government will have a source of income. The real situation here is if we support the Israeli government to go in and bomb the energy structure, and I mean, which we've talked about before, the pipelines, the refineries, the chemical plants, the storage facilities, if we go in and destroy those, we destroy the income not only for the source of the existing Iranian government, but should we, to your question, should we have regime change, the new government is going to have all that stuff, energy infrastructure rebuilt because it's the principal source. The one thing that nobody's talking about, except we are today now, is that the largest customer and the largest buyer for Iranian crude is China. If you shut down the crude supply availability from Iran through China, where are they going to get their oil?
Okay, they have bombed some storage facilities, but limited.
Limited. That's what I say. It's been very selective. They haven't really gone where I think they need to go. This the pipelines, which is the transportation of the crude from the wells to the refineries and the refineries. Okay. And that has much broader global implications than regime change, because if they can't supply oil to China and they can't sell oil on the open market, that's the principal source of revenue to this government.
Okay.
And the people will in fact, I mean, you can make a choice, Perry. You want the people to have an uprising, so you bomb the oil facilities that gets rid of their relationship with China as far as a supplier, but at the same time, you perhaps make China a little more angry, and the regime change, if and when it comes, has no source of income.
Okay. No, I totally get that, and I know that is clearly in place, but it appears to me now that they've been strategically taking out military leaders, nuclear scientists, and just yesterday they took out the replacement of a military leader that's already been taken out. I mean, their precision here is stunning. So they have to know where the Ayatollah is.
Yeah. Can I be so bold as to ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay. Here we have, I'm going to give you a name. I'm not going to give you a name. We have a country who's figured out how they can smuggle missiles and drones across another country's border, and then when the appropriate time is, launch it to destroy a part of an air force. Now, here's the question. Did Ukraine teach Israel, or did Israel teach Ukraine? Because what Israel did was exactly what they did in Ukraine, crossing the border into Russia. Which one?
Look, it's amazing when you look at that they were able to launch drones inside Iran. You kind of have to ask yourself if this is all bark and no bite, because the only thing that they have on the table that's dangerous is the development of a nuclear bomb. Otherwise, everything else looks to be kind of a paper tiger. And I don't want to take away from the fact that their missiles are serious, but that's all they got.
Right. And I think that the third part of this triangle is the United States. And when I mean the United States, again, you and I have talked many, many times about the millions of people who come across the border illegally. A lot of them not good, solid citizens, not supporting what the American way is. And what we saw over the weekend with the No Kings, and the other demonstrations, we saw a call to arms. Los Angeles initially was the initial call to arms to test to see whether they could get enough people to come in and start. And they launched it over the weekend. Now, the leadership of the organization, which I sent you a commentary on, I think, this morning, said that they had between 2 and 5 million people at protests across the country. I mean, you could drive a truck between 2 and 5, and you got to ask your question, well, how realistic was the 2 and how realistic was the 5? So I think that there's been some disappointment on the part of the left that they didn't get a larger turnout. And I think what happened in Iran and Israel distracted a lot of people in this country.
All right, let me take a quick break. Dan Perkins with us. Check out his website, danperkins.guru. His outreach to veterans, which is an amazing outreach, songs and stories for soldiers.us. And go online and order up his series of romantic novels called Sad Eyes, Volume 1 and 2. You can check that out. There's a picture of the cover of the book. We'll be right back. Okay, Dan Perkins is back with us. I always enjoy chatting with him. Dan, a couple things here that's interesting. Senator Josh Hawley has announced an investigation into what seems to be a well-organized movement, temporarily, maybe short-term movement called No Kings. He is claiming that it's well-funded, well-organized, and well-supplied, and he wants to get to the bottom of it as to who is doing this and who is funding this. When they show up with truckloads of water, masks, and everything that these people needed, they seem to have at their fingertips. The obvious suspect is always George Soros, but to your point, you're wondering now if foreign money is doing this.
I sent you a copy of a commentary on this very subject matter that you're asking about. And the title of the commentary is Invisible Isn't Invisible Anymore. Invisible is the name of a nonprofit organization that is sponsored by 198 left-leaning Democratic organizations, which has, and I'm going to be specific about this, has an operating budget of $2.1 billion. They have been the orchestration and the distributor of products for what happened in Los Angeles and what happened around the country with the Kings. So there may be foreign money, but if you go to their website, which that story that I sent you is on your news, Dan Perkins, and you'll be able to see a link to the website of the company, of the foundation, the nonprofit, and they'll look at all 198 organizations that belong. Part of the leadership of that organization is run by the president of the American Federation of Teachers. And Randy, yesterday, resigned from the Democratic National Committee.
Right.
Also, the president of the Service Employees Union resigned from the Executive Committee because the Democratic Party the leadership of the Democratic Party is trying to move more towards the center, and Randy and the other person said, no, we're not going to do that. If you're not going to go our way, we're leaving. So we had two big union leaders who've been very outspoken against the president and what's going on, resigning from the Democratic National Committee, but are on invisible.
Very, very interesting. All right, we'll track that. All right, before I run out of time, I want to come back over, because it's somewhat related, this amazing happening over the weekend of the assassination of the Minnesota Speaker of the House and her husband, preceded by the shooting of a senator and his wife. Massive manhunt. Finally, he gives up and they catch him. His car is loaded with a lot of guns and ammunition and No King flyers. Here's my question. Do we know which side of the fence he's on? It doesn't seem to be clear what the motive is here.
Well, I think we can rhetorically ask that same questions about a lot of these political shootings, like the two young Israeli couples that were shot, ironically, outside the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C., and other people who've been shot. It's a situation where we have people. It used to be, Perry, long ago, which was like maybe 5 years ago, was long ago, that it took a long time to radicalize an individual who may have been an American citizen and they maybe had to go to Iran or Afghanistan or whatever. It took a long time to radicalize. If you look at some of these people, they've been radicalized by the various terrorist organizations in the United States in the matter of 4 weeks, 5 weeks. So that I think that what we're seeing, again, what we just talked about before the break, I believe that there are hundreds of thousands of people who have come across the southern border illegally that are here to form an army that at some point in time will be called upon to attack America across the country, no limitations. And I think we saw part of that last weekend as a test. We saw what happened in Portland and Seattle and the other places. It wasn't quite as strong, but they're testing the waters to see if have they reached the point where they need to call for a jihad in the United States.
So where does this ultimately go with the National Guard? I mean, you think about this. California National Guard. So who's in charge here, California or the nation?
According to the Constitution, Washington, D.C., the president has the power because the national security trumps, and no pun intended, anything that a state or local government can do. So even though the Justice Breyer decided that it should go back to Gavin Newsom, I really can't think of a worse guy to put in charge of the National Guard in California in a riot situation than Gavin Newsom. But I think that the district court, Breyer's decision, was set aside on a temporary basis by the appellate court of the Ninth Circuit, and I think this is quickly going to the Supreme Court, and I think the Supreme Court is going to look at the Constitution, and the Constitution is clear. The power belongs to the president when it comes to national security and protecting the American people, and it can't be taken away by a local governor.
Because the confusion came when the president nationalized the National Guard.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't the National Guard already nationalized?
No. The National Guard operates in its day-to-day activities. I was in the Guard at one time under the state adjutant general, which reports to the governor. But as we saw Eisenhower and we saw Johnson and other people nationalized the National Guard, which means they took them from reserve status to active duty status, which meant they become under the power and control of the Defense Department and the President. So no, they're not national. They have to be nationalized by an executive order of the President.
All right. In doing so, then that makes the National Guard under the control of the President.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So
the Constitution says if the President signs an executive order to nationalize, put the local National Guard in security service, whatever he says, because of a situation of unattainable and uncontrollable by the local authority. When he does that, they're no longer, they are members of the Army.
yeah, okay. And that was primarily for the protection of federal employees and properties in L.A. That's where it all started.
Right, and he brought in the Marine Corps. See, there's a very fine line here because the Constitution doesn't allow the President to use active duty military inside the borders of the United States. That's one of the reasons why they have the Guard and the reserves. But in the case of the way he did nationalize, he simply ordered the Marines to go and protect U.S. government property, building property. That's perfectly, because they were not in a conflict situation. They were simply in a defensive mechanism to protect American property.
Good to see you, buddy. People want to get your commentary. What website?
I think the best place to go would probably be danperkins.guru,
okay,
or danperkinsmedia.org also.
Okay, danperkinsmedia.org or danperkins.guru. Good to see you, buddy. Stay in the fight.